whisper of wind carried the chilling truth, a silent lament across the sun-baked plains. They had tied the Nez Perce girl to a speeding wagon, not for crime, but for a twisted leg, for the very shame of her being. This was the desolate truth of their desperation, a sacrifice to a fear deeper than any canyon. But from the shimmering horizon, where the land met an unforgiving sky, a solitary shadow galloped closer, an Apache hunter, a ghost of retribution, riding into a destiny unforeseen. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The dust was a constant companion in the Nez Perce village, clinging to moccasins and hair, coating the inside of mouths with a gritty reminder of their harsh existence. It rose in swirling eddies when the children played, a golden haze that softened the edges of their lean, sun-darkened faces, but it also masked the quiet desperation that gnawed at the adults. Lyra knew this dust intimately. It was the color of her despair, the texture of her daily humiliation. Born with a leg that turned inward, a limb twisted like an ancient gnarled root, she had never known the swift grace of her peers. Each step was a deliberate, painful testament to her difference, a visible mark in a community where physical prowess was synonymous with survival and perceived weakness, a burden. Her mother's eyes, once soft like doeskin, now held a haunted gaze when they rested upon Lyra, a reflection of the unspoken fear that she was a drain, an ill omen, a mouth to feed that could not contribute to the hunt or the harvest in equal measure. The whispers, like the dust, were insidious, carried on the wind, speaking of bad spirits, of curses, of the earth itself rejecting her form. She felt the weight of every hungry belly in the village, the silent accusation in every averted glance. The world felt vast and indifferent, a sprawling canvas of indifference where her small, aching form was merely a flaw in the grand design. She often sought solace by the river's edge, watching the water rush by, an endless, unburdened flow, wishing she could be swallowed by its relentless current, erased from a world that had no place for her. The silence of the plains often amplified the accusations within her own mind, a relentless drumbeat of inadequacy. She was a burden, a shame, a weight. These words, though never uttered aloud by her family, vibrated in the very air she breathed, etched into the landscape of her young, fragile existence. The sun, a brutal eye in the sky, seemed to burn not just her skin, but the very essence of her hope, drying it to brittle ash. The decision had been brewing for weeks, a bitter concoction steeped in fear and desperate hope. A brutal winter, a scarce hunt, and sickness sweeping through the lodges had sharpened the elders' faces, turning their wisdom into a grim resolve. They spoke of appeasement, of cleansing, of severing the link to misfortune that, in their minds, Lyra represented. It was a cold, brutal dawn when they came for her, not with anger, but with a chilling, ritualistic solemnity. Her mother's eyes, swollen and red-rimmed, could not meet hers, a silent betrayal more profound than any shout. Lyra remembered the rough hands on her arms, the unyielding grip of men she had known since birth, their faces masked by a chilling, collective purpose. Her father, usually a mountain of quiet strength, stood apart, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the ground as if the very earth held the answers he could not find. He did not intervene. He did not speak. The silence was deafening, a roar in Lyra's ears louder than any scream she might have uttered. She was led, not dragged, to the waiting wagon, its heavy wooden wheels already caked with the morning's dust. The air thrummed with a strange, unnatural quiet, broken only by the snorting of the horses and the creak of the wagon's harness. There was no pity in the faces of the villagers gathered, only a desperate, silent plea for their own survival, a grim determination to cast out what they believed tainted their communal spirit. They saw not a girl, but a symbol, a vessel of their misfortunes. A thick, rawhide rope slick with dew was brought forth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat, a desperate plea that never found voice. The binding was swift, impersonal around her waist, securing her to the sturdy rear axle. The knot was tight, unforgiving. She felt the chill of the morning air, and the colder chill of absolute abandonment. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, her small, vulnerable form at its mercy. She was being cast out, not into the wilderness for mere survival, but into the maw of shame, a living sacrifice to superstition and fear. Her twisted leg, the source of their collective dread, felt heavier than stone, an anchor pulling her down into an abyss of despair. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the darkness that enveloped her was absolute, impenetrable. The lurch of the wagon was a violent awakening, tearing Lyra from the paralyzed stupor that had gripped her. The horses, spurred by the drivers, surged forward, and the landscape blurred into a dizzying streak of brown and green. She bounced violently, her head snapping back, the rope digging into her flesh a merciless embrace. Each jolt sent a fresh wave of agony through her body, a searing pain that was both physical and emotional. Her twisted leg, dragging uselessly, scraped against the rough earth, threatening to snag, to tear, to pull her beneath the unforgiving wheels. Dust, thick and suffocating, billowed up, stinging her eyes, filling her lungs with a dry, choking ache. The world was reduced to this brutal rhythm, the clatter of hooves, the screech of wood, the relentless jarring impact of stone against bone. She was a rag doll, flung about by an unseen, uncaring hand, a vessel for the village's desperate hope, a symbol of their sacrifice. Her mind, battered by the physical ordeal, clung to fragmented memories, images flashing through the storm of pain. Her grandmother's gnarled hands gently braiding her hair by the firelight, singing lullabies that spoke of resilient spirits and ancient gods. Her mother, for a fleeting moment, holding her close, a tender touch before the fear hardened her gaze. These fleeting glimpses of warmth were like embers in a bitter wind, threatening to extinguish, leaving only the cold ash of abandonment. Then, through the dust-choked haze, something shifted on the horizon, a distant speck, growing slowly, almost imperceptibly, against the vast canvas of the sky. At first, she thought it was just another trick of the light, a mirage shimmering in the heat. But it persisted, growing clearer, taking on the unmistakable form of a rider, not Nez Perce. The silhouette was too lean, too fluid, riding with an almost unnatural stillness like a predator observing its prey. A shiver, not entirely of fear, ran down her spine. The sun, climbing higher, began to bake the air, intensifying the ordeal. Her throat was raw, her lips cracked, but no cry escaped her. She was beyond tears, beyond supplication. There was only the relentless motion, the searing pain, and the growing enigmatic presence on the horizon, an unknown quantity in a world that had already decided her fate. The silence between the wagon drivers was heavy, weighted with the grim responsibility of their task, their faces set, unreadable. Kyle, the Apache hunter, had been tracking the small band of deer for 2 days, a solitary shadow moving through the scrubland with the quiet grace of a phantom. His own people had exiled him years ago, a story of an ancient blood feud and a broken promise that had left him a wanderer, beholden to no one, yet burdened by a code of his own making. He knew the land, its subtle shifts and hidden dangers, better than he knew the faces of his own ancestors. He was a creature of the wild, driven by instinct and a silent internal vigilance. It was this vigilance that caught the anomaly in the distance, a Nez Perce wagon, moving at an unusual, frantic pace, and something, or someone, dragging behind it. His first instinct was caution, the ingrained survival mechanism of an Apache in foreign Nez Perce lands. Intervention in another tribe's affairs was an invitation to conflict, a dangerous dance with unknown consequences. He had seen enough violence in his life to wish for no more, his soul etched with the scars of old battles and betrayals. Yet as he closed the distance, the grotesque reality of the scene struck him with the force of a physical blow. A girl, small and broken, tethered like a discarded possession, her body a blur of agony and dust. His jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath his tanned skin. The sight ignited something primal within him, a spark of indignation that had long smoldered beneath layers of self-imposed solitude. He had been an outcast, had known the bitter taste of rejection, had borne the weight of injustice. This was not justice. This was barbarism, born of fear and desperation. He saw the faces of the men on the wagon, their expressions grim, devoid of mercy. driven by a fear he understood but could not condone. His own tribe, too, had its dark practices, its moments of profound cruelty born of hard times and harder beliefs. He carried the burden of those memories, the weight of a lineage that had inflicted as much pain as it had endured. The sun glinted off his obsidian knife, a silent testament to a life lived on the razor's edge. His horse, a sturdy pinto, felt the shift in his rider, its ears flicking back, sensing the sudden shift in purpose. Cale drew a deep breath, the taste of dust and dry grass filling his lungs. He was an outsider, a ghost in this land, but some lines once crossed demanded a response, even from a man who had sworn off involvement. This was one of them. He spurred his horse, the thundering hooves a defiant challenge against the vast, indifferent silence. The thundering hooves became a palpable presence, a drumbeat of approaching fate that finally pierced the shroud of Lyra's pain. The wagon drivers, too, heard it, their heads snapping back, their faces contorting in a mixture of surprise and alarm. The Apache hunter, Cale, burst into view, a dark, imposing silhouette against the morning sun, his horse a blur of controlled power. He rode with a predatory grace, a silent force of nature unleashed. There was no hesitation in his movements, no overt display of aggression, just an unwavering determination that brooked no argument. He rode alongside the wagon, his hand outstretched, a silent command for the drivers to halt. One of the Perce men, a burly figure with a hardened face, shouted something in their tongue, reaching for a hunting knife. The air crackled with unspoken threats, a volatile tension hanging heavy. Kyle's response was swift, economical. He did not draw a weapon. Instead, with a powerful, calculated move, he leaned from his saddle, seizing the reins of the lead horse with a grip of iron. The horse whinnied in protest, rearing slightly, throwing the wagon off balance. The drivers cursed, struggling to regain control, their faces now etched with fear and fury. The wagon lurched to a violent stop, its momentum abruptly arrested. Lyra was flung forward, then snapped back by the taut rope, the sudden cessation of movement almost as jarring as the journey itself. Pain flared through her, a searing line across her waist. Cale dismounted with a fluid grace, his eyes, dark and unwavering, fixed on Lyra, then sweeping over the flustered Perce men. His gaze was not accusatory, but held a deep, profound authority that silenced their protests. He moved to the rear of the wagon, his fingers already working at the unforgiving knot that bound Lyra. The rawhide, tightened by friction and her own weight, resisted, but Cale's hands were strong, accustomed to the intricacies of knots and survival. The drivers hesitated, their hands hovering over their weapons, but something in Kyle's stillness, his quiet command, held them at bay. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and perhaps deeply unsettled by his sudden, inexplicable appearance. With a final, decisive tug, the rope slackened, then gave way. Lyra crumpled, not to the ground, but into Kyle's waiting arms. Her body was a symphony of aches, but a new startling sensation pulsed beneath the pain, a faint tremor of relief, an almost forgotten whisper of safety in the presence of this formidable, silent stranger. Her breath hitched, not in pain, but in the sudden, profound understanding of her deliverance. The silence that followed Lyra's liberation was heavier than any spoken word, thick with the unsaid accusations and the stark reality of the Apache's intervention. Cale did not linger. His gaze, briefly sweeping over the stunned Perce drivers, held no malice, only a cold, unyielding resolve. He lifted Lyra carefully, her small frame surprisingly light in his arms, and placed her gently upon his horse. Her muscles screamed in protest, every jolt of the horse a fresh torment, yet she clung to Cale's tunic, her fingers clenching the rough fabric, as if he were the only solid thing left in a world that had crumbled beneath her. He swung himself onto the horse behind her, a swift, practiced movement, and with a soft click of his tongue, urged the pinto away from the halted wagon. They rode not fast, but steadily, away from the scene of her ordeal, leaving the bewildered Perce men and their lumbering wagon behind, shrinking figures against the vast, indifferent plains. The sun, now high in the sky, beat down relentlessly, baking the earth and shimmering off the distant horizons. Cale chose a path less traveled, through a winding arroyo. its red walls offering a momentary respite from the open expanse. He found a secluded alcove, shielded by ancient wind-sculpted rocks and sparse brush. It was a place of quiet contemplation, far from the echoes of human cruelty. He dismounted first, then carefully helped Lyra down, supporting her weight as her legs, stiff from being tied, threatened to give way. He moved with an economical grace, his actions precise, devoid of unnecessary gestures. There was no pity in his eyes, but a quiet, almost clinical assessment of her condition. He offered her water from a worn leather canteen, holding it to her lips. The cool liquid was a balm to her parched throat, a sensation of simple kindness she hadn't tasted in what felt like an eternity. He did not ask her name, nor did he speak his own. There was no need for words between them, only the unspoken language of shared vulnerability and the raw truth of their immediate existence. He set about building a small, smokeless fire, his movements practiced and efficient. Lyra watched him, her eyes still wide with a lingering terror, slowly beginning to absorb the details of this stranger. The strong, quiet hands, the deep lines etched around his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun, the stoic resolve that seemed to emanate from his very being. The fear still coiled in her belly, a cold, reptilian thing, but alongside it, a fragile seed of something else had begun to take root, the bewildering, unsettling sensation of safety. Days bled into weeks under the vast, indifferent sky. Kyle and Lyra became silent companions in the wilderness, two broken souls finding an unlikely solace in each other's company. He taught her the rhythms of survival, how to find water in barren lands, the edible plants from the poisonous, how to read the subtle signs of the wind and the whispers of the earth. He did not coddle her, nor did he express pity for her twisted leg. Instead, he simply adapted, showing her how to use a sturdy branch as a crutch, how to move with deliberate, measured steps that conserved energy. Lyra, for her part, watched him with an intensity born of pure necessity. She saw the quiet strength in his hands as he carved tools from wood, the unwavering patience in his eyes as he taught her to track. She observed his solitude, the way he would sit for hours, gazing at the horizon, a deep melancholy etched onto his stoic face. He rarely spoke of his past, but his actions were a silent language, revealing snippets of the man beneath the hardened exterior. One evening, under a sky ablaze with 1,000,000 stars, he pointed to a distant cluster, not in explanation, but in shared wonder. "My mother taught me the stories of the sky," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "She believed they were the spirits of our ancestors, watching over us, guiding our path." His voice trailed off, a distant sorrow in his tone. Lyra understood instinctively that he too carried the weight of loss, the echo of a profound absence. A strategic flashback played out in her mind, a memory of a time before her own exile, a hushed conversation she had overheard amongst the Nez Perce women. They spoke of a young Apache warrior, strong and respected, who had defied tribal law to save a child from a raiding party, a child of a rival tribe. His act of compassion, though noble, had been seen as a breach of ancient protocol, a betrayal of their own people's suffering. He had been cast out, not for malice, but for a disruptive empathy that transcended tribal boundaries. The pieces clicked into place, a silent revelation. Kyle had been exiled for his heart, just as she had been for her leg. He understood the chilling bite of rejection, the desolation of being deemed unworthy by your own kind. This shared wound, unspoken yet deeply felt, forged a fragile yet unbreakable bond between them. He was not just her rescuer, he was a mirror, reflecting a past she now saw with new eyes, a past that had shaped them both into exiles. The fear that had initially defined her relationship with him began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning trust, a sense of belonging with the one person who truly understood the language of loss and quiet resilience. Their journey was not a flight, but a meandering search for a new place, a new rhythm. They moved through the land, not as conquerors, but as part of its fabric, two shadows among many. Lyra's leg remained twisted, a constant physical reminder of her past, but it no longer felt like a brand of shame. Under Cale's patient, unyielding guidance, she learned to compensate, to find strength in adaptation. Her arms grew stronger, her balance more precise. She learned the subtle shifts of her weight, the placement of her crutch, transforming her perceived weakness into a unique form of movement, a dance with the challenging terrain. One parched afternoon, as they skirted the edge of a small, struggling settlers' camp, the past reasserted itself with a sudden, jarring force. A group of heavily armed men, their faces grim and weathered, emerged from the camp. They were settlers, not of the type to offer kindness. Their eyes, hard and suspicious, immediately fixed on Lyra, then on Cale. One of them, a thick-necked man with a cruel sneer, pointed. "Look there, an Apache savage, and what's that he's got? A cripple, a burden." The words, though not in her tongue, carried the universal sting of contempt, the familiar echo of the judgment she had endured. A cold knot formed in Lyra's stomach. The world, it seemed, was full of people eager to cast judgment, to define worth based on appearances, on a twisted limb or a different skin. But this time, it was different. This time, she was not alone. Cale stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and the settlers, his stance a silent, unyielding defiance. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife, a quiet threat. There was no rage in his eyes, but a dangerous, watchful stillness that warned them away. The settler took another step, his hand reaching for his rifle. "We don't take kindly to your kind around here, Redskin. And that's just a mouth to feed, useless." The word useless resonated deeply, a painful memory, but Lyra felt a surge of something unexpected. Not fear, but a hot, defiant spark. She met the settler's gaze. Her eyes, though young, held a depth of experience that belied her years. She was no longer a voiceless sacrifice. She was a survivor. Cale's presence was a shield, but her own spirit, nurtured in the unforgiving wilderness, had begun to forge itself anew, not into the girl she once was, but into something resilient, something unbreakable. The confrontation ended without bloodshed, the settlers, sensing Cale's quiet resolve and perhaps unnerved by the intensity in Lyra's eyes, grudgingly retreated. The encounter with the settlers was a crucible, burning away the last vestiges of the shame Lyra had carried. It had been an external projection, an ugly label affixed by others, but now, under the vast, indifferent sky, she saw it for what it truly was, a lie. Her twisted leg was a part of her, yes, a testament to her journey, a physical record of her resilience, but it was not her definition. She had learned to track a deer with a silent grace that belied her limp, to identify constellations that guided them through moonless nights, to find sustenance where others saw only desolation. She had learned the rhythm of survival, not just of the body but of the spirit. Kyle, watching her, saw the transformation. The fearful child, once a bundle of raw nerves and unspoken anguish, had begun to unfurl, revealing the tough, unyielding core within. Her eyes, once downcast, now met his with a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement of their parallel journeys through the crucible of abandonment. He, too, had found a measure of healing in her presence. His self-imposed solitude, once a balm, had become a prison. In saving Lyra, in guiding her through the wilderness, he had, in turn, found a purpose beyond mere survival, a connection that anchored him to the living world. His own past, the bitter memory of his exile, no longer held the same power over him. The act of compassion had become an act of profound self-acceptance, a reconciliation with the very empathy that had once cost him everything. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, painting the clouds in fiery hues, Lyra sat by their small fire, her crutch laid beside her. She picked up a smooth, river-worn stone, turning it over and over in her fingers. "The shame," she began, her voice soft yet clear, each word deliberate. "It was never mine. It was theirs. Their fear." Kyle, watching the flames, simply nodded, his silence a profound affirmation. There was no need for grand pronouncements, no dramatic declarations. The truth resonated between them, a quiet, undeniable current. Her journey had been one of shedding, of peeling back the layers of imposed identity to reveal the true self beneath. The pivotal emotional climax was not a scream or a battle, but this quiet, internal shift, a profound moment of self-reclamation. She was not a burden. She was not a curse. She was Lyra, a daughter of the plains, forged in hardship, refined by resilience. And the world, vast and challenging as it was, now held not just indifference, but the promise of a future she could claim, not just survive. The land stretched endlessly before them, a tapestry of plains and mountains, of sun-baked earth and sky so vast it humbled the soul. Lyra and Kyle stood on a high ridge, the wind whipping their hair, the silence profound. They were no longer defined by what had been taken from them, but by what they had forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. The memory of the wagon, of the desperate, fearful faces of her village, remained, a ghost on the edges of her consciousness, but it no longer held the power to shackle her spirit. She was free, not just from the physical bondage, but from the invisible chains of shame. Kale, the silent Apache hunter, had been the catalyst, the unlooked-for hand of fate that had pulled her back from the precipice. He had shown her not just how to survive, but how to reclaim her own narrative, to rewrite the brutal sentences etched upon her being. His path might diverge from hers. The wanderer was meant to wander, and she, though resilient, sought a different kind of belonging, a place where her strength would be seen, not her perceived weakness. But the bond forged between them, in the crucible of the wilderness, was indelible. It was a silent understanding, a testament to the profound connections that can bloom in the most barren of landscapes, between the most disparate of souls. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, a final dramatic flourish to their shared journey. There was no grand farewell, no tearful embrace. Such displays were not their way, nor were they necessary. Their connection transcended words, a quiet promise etched into the very silence between them. Lyra looked out at the fading light, her gaze steady, resolute. Her future was not a predetermined path, but an open expanse, waiting to be shaped by her own will. The shame had been transformed into a quiet power, a deep well of resilience she now carried within her. She would walk, not run, but walk with a strength that came from within, each step a defiant affirmation of her right to exist, to thrive. The story of the Perce girl, once tied to a wagon for shame, was now a story of an unbreakable spirit, a testament to the unexpected hope that can emerge from the darkest corners of human experience, like a lone desert flower blooming after a long, hard rain, beautiful in its defiance, enduring in its silent strength. The plain stretched on, carrying the weight of untold stories, and two silent figures, having found their own measure of peace, moved forward, one step at a time, into the vast, uncertain promise of tomorrow.